Welcome to the Scientific Worldview, the podcast dedicated to exploring the big questions in science and philosophy. I am Daniel Gambacorta.
I'm Atana Shannon.
Atana, how do you make decisions? And how do you know you've made the right decision?
Very carefully.
You have any method? Any procedure?
I wouldn't say there's a specific method. It varies. Depends.
Well, let's talk about method. Let's talk about decision theory, the study of making correct decisions.
There's a whole theory.
There's an entire theory.
That's cool.
Imagine you are offered a lottery. You can pay $1 for a 10% chance of winning $100. Should you play the lottery?
Yeah, it's only $1. Play one time, though.
Okay. You should play it one time. And what's your reasoning behind the decision? Why should you play it one time?
I would say if you start playing it more than one time, you might get like the urge to play it more and more and more. And by the time that you know it, you've spent $100
Mm-hmm.
and then it's not worth it anymore.
Well, what if I told you there is a procedure that can tell you whether you should play this lottery and how many times you should play it?
What is this procedure?
It is known as expected value. According to this idea, you should choose whatever option is highest in expected value, do whatever is best in expectation, and there's a way to calculate this. You multiply the probability of each outcome by the utility of that outcome. Utility is this term of art. It means how good it is. For our simplified example, we're just going to assume that money equals utility. More money just means better. And this is oversimplified, but here's an example of applying this kind of analysis to the lottery question. We take each possible outcome and we multiply it by its probability. If you play the lottery, you have a 10% chance of winning. So we multiply 10% times $100, that's what you would win, we get $10. There's a 90% chance that you don't win anything. So we would do 90% times 0 gives us 0. And then we would have to subtract $1 because to play the lottery, we have to pay $1. So we get $10 minus $1 gives us $9. We are making $9 in expectation every time we play the lottery. Now, if you don't play the lottery, you are guaranteed to make no money. So it would just be 100% times 0, which is 0. Since $9 is more than 0, you should play the lottery.
Agreed. Maybe 9 times.
Well, think about it this way. If you played the lottery 100 times, 10 times in expectation you would win because you have a 10% chance of winning. So 10 times you would make $100, which is $1,000. 90 times you would win nothing. And you would have spent $100 on lottery tickets. So you would make $1,000, you would have spent $100, you would make $900.
Sounds like you should play the lottery.
You should play this as much as you can, actually.
But to take it like a step further, how do you numerify variables that don't have a numerical value?
Like what?
Enjoyment, like human enjoyment. Like, what if you want to do something just because you think it might make you a little happier?
That's a good question. In this example, we're using money as utility, and money is this number It's very clear how much money you have. Now, you can apply this framework to any sort of decision, or at least most decisions. But most of the time, you're not dealing with money. You'll be dealing with other sorts of utility, like your enjoyment, your happiness. And how do I turn my happiness into a number, right?
Right.
There is no procedure for doing that. So this is, in practice, going to work better when you have something you can directly turn into a number, but it would also work for these more nebulous things, but you would have to kind of just make the numbers up.
You turn happiness into money, and then that money is
Right,
the number.
exactly. I have in front of me, and I literally have this. You can see it. I have a little bag. And in this bag, there are 7 red poker chips and 3 blue poker chips. I want to play a game. I'm going to draw a chip from the bag, show it to you, and then put it back. Mix the bag around. I'm going to draw a chip, show it to you, put it back in the bag, mix it around, and then for a third and final time, I'm going to draw a chip, show it to you. Each time I show you the chip, I want you to guess, is it going to be red or blue? And you get paid $10, imaginary dollars, which are just as valuable. You get $10 every time you get it right. Okay, you ready to play?
I can't send you a Venmo request after this.
If you use imaginary Venmo, I will pay you in imaginary dollars.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I reach into my bag, which again, I'm literally holding. And what do you want to guess? Red or blue?
Red.
All right, I draw. Oh, turned out to be blue. Okay, 0 so far. I put the chip back in the bag. I mix it around. What do you want to guess this time?
Red. Woohoo!
It is red.
Red.
It is red. Okay, let's do this one more time. What do you want to guess for the third and final time?
Blue.
Okay. It is red.
Darn.
Okay. So I think you made 10 imaginary dollars.
$10 richer.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Atana. There is a single correct strategy when you play this game. Can you guess what it is?
Always guess red.
Always guess red. And why would it be always guess red?
Because you have the higher probability of getting red.
Yeah, there's more red chips in the bag.
Yeah.
We could express this using expected value. There's 7 red chips, 3 blue chips. So 70% chance of red, 30% chance of blue. What's the expected value of predicting red? 70% times $10, $7. What's the expected value of predicting blue? 30% times $10, which is $3. 7 is more than 3, so you should go with red. Now I'm putting the chip back into the bag and mixing it around. So the second time I ask you, it is exactly the same situation as the first time. There's no difference. It's the exact same decision. So you have no reason to change what you do. You should again bet on red.
Always bet red.
Always bet red. Now, in fact, there are studies where people are presented with this problem, and many people do deviate from this optimal strategy. It seems like for 2 reasons. One is known as the gambler's fallacy, thinking that these draws, which are in fact independent, feeling like they somehow affect each other anyway. So maybe if you get 2 reds in a row, somebody thinks, well, blue must be due, so I'm going to bet on blue. The other mistake that people seem to make for this kind of question is they will reason that blue is sometimes going to be drawn, so I should sometimes bet on blue. I'm not going to get it right every time if I go red every time.
Yeah, some of the time you have to bet blue.
Well, you can't predict when blue is going to come up. There's no reason to think you are going to be able to nail it that 30% of the time when blue comes up. So even though blue will occasionally be drawn, you're going to make the most money by always betting on red.
So you just have to eat the 30% error rate.
If you bet on blue sometimes, you're going to have an even higher error rate.
That's true.
This expected value idea, this is why casinos exist. They can only exist if you are losing money in expectation when you play casino games. You can win at a casino, but you are losing in expectation. That is why they profit and why they can exist.
I don't like casinos. They're a little bit evil.
A lot of the money that casinos make comes from people who go to the casino a lot, or lose a lot of money at a casino. So you could argue that they're predatory in that way. It's not like they're getting a small amount from each person who visits. It's more like they're getting a lot from very few people who, for whatever reason, can't stop themselves from going to the casino.
See, that's just more predatory, yeah.
And that's an interesting ethical question that we will address in some future episode. This approach to thinking about decision making, where you're considering probabilities and utilities, people don't do this explicitly, but for a lot of decisions that people make, people are considering these concepts at least implicitly. If somebody goes on a job interview and they think it's really unlikely that I get this job, but it would be really good if I got it, and therefore it's worth going on the interview.
They're using expected value to like guide their actions.
In practice, it's a low probability, but it's a very high utility. So even though the probability is so low, the goodness of the payoff is so high that it kind of outweighs the probability.
I think that can also be true of like the lottery in some cases, like the big lottery ones. Like people are like, I'll just buy this $1 ticket and maybe possibly I'll get really rich. That would be nice.
In those cases, the person is making a mistake because even though the dollar amount is really high, the probability of winning is so low that it's still negative in expectation.
Aw,
Lotteries,
so sad.
in practice, will never make the ticket buyer money, or else the lottery wouldn't be offered.
That's true. Hey, the lottery technically, in a way, made me money because the lottery provides us with a scholarship in New Mexico, and I got my degree with it. So one day I'll make money off of that.
Imagine it's the year 3000. You get a letter offering you an amazing opportunity. All you have to do is walk down the street. So you walk down the street and you're greeted by a robot who says they are a super intelligence. They are much smarter than any human being. In front of the robot is a table, and on the table there are two boxes, box A and box B. Box A is clear, it's see-through. You could see that there's $1,000 inside. Box B, on the other hand, is opaque. The robot says you can choose to open either only box B or both box A and box B. And whatever you choose to open, you get to keep whatever's inside. Now, the robot reveals that they scanned your brain as you were walking over. And they're going to use this information to make a prediction about what you're going to do. If the robot predicted you would take both boxes, the robot put nothing in box B. But if the robot predicted you would only take box B, the robot put $1 million in box B. And you've heard of this robot offering this deal to people before. You know the robot's prediction accuracy is something like 99.9%. So what do? Do you open both boxes or only box B?
Both.
Why is that?
Because either way, I'm getting $1 million. But if I only open one and I choose incorrectly, then I don't get anything.
As you were walking over, the robot scanned your brain, predicted what you were going to do. If the robot predicted you would open both boxes, it put nothing in box B.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood.
And the robot's prediction accuracy is 99.9%.
Well, I would have taken box B. So then I would just open. I would have taken both boxes. So then I would open box B.
All right. So you switching to only box B?
Only box B.
Okay. Why is that?
Because it would have predicted that I would take both boxes because obviously I misinterpreted.
All right. You're going with only box B. Consider the money's either in box B or it's not. It's not affected by your decision. The money's already there or it's not there. So aren't you literally leaving money on the table if you choose to only open box B? Shouldn't you just open both boxes because choosing to open both is not going to affect whether there's any money in box B?
True. I don't know. That's a very good point.
And this is a contentious question amongst philosophers. They think about decisions in a different way. Some philosophers say we should think in terms of our causal effects on the world. I can't cause the amount of money in box B to change, so I should open both boxes.
Clearly.
Here is an opposing viewpoint. You can model what the robot is doing by scanning you and making a prediction as making a simulation of you. There's a simulated Atana. Put simulated Atana in this situation and then observe what simulated Atana is going to do. You have the same mind as simulated Atana. Whatever decision you end up making, simulated Atana would have made the same decision for the same reason. There's just no other way around it. It's the same mind. So if you put the same mind in the same situation, you have to get the same decision. If you, in real life, choose to open both boxes, that means that simulated Atana opened both boxes. And therefore, the robot will put nothing in box B, and you'll walk away sad. It's not that you caused this simulated version of you to open both boxes. It's already happened. You can't cause it. But just given that you are the same mental process, you will arrive at the same conclusion. So you could argue you should only open box B because that will mean that the simulated version of you only opened box B. The robot will have put the $1 million in there and you'll walk away a millionaire.
Would it take more than $1 million to put me in a simulation, though? Because then it's not worth it.
Well, this is a super intelligent robot in the year 3000. So it's not costing the robot much to make the simulated version of you.
Okay. So then box B it is.
And in this way of thinking, what it means to make a good decision is what makes you win, what gets you what you want. How do you walk away with the $1 million? If you are really in this situation, the way to walk away with $1 million is to only open box B.
The one and only way.
If you open both boxes and you say, but I had to, it was the rational thing. I cannot philosophically justify only opening one box. Well, guess what? You're not a millionaire. Who cares? What matters is you get the $1 million.
I really wish I had $1 million.
Well, once this podcast blows up.
I look forward to it.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the psychology of judgment and decision making. We're rational insofar as we arrive at correct conclusions. We optimize for getting what we want. And by that standard, most people are pretty rational. You wake up, you feel hungry, and you rationally decide to eat something, which is very reasonable. You want money to survive, so you go to your job. And your job is far away, so you rationally decide to get into your car. Most of what people do makes sense. Psychologists like to point to the particular instances where we're systematically irrational. And the term for this is cognitive bias. A bias would be a deviation from rationality, some kind of systematic pattern. So if you just can't remember your mother's birthday, that's not a bias. If you don't know the capital of Austria, that's not a bias. It's just some mistaken pattern of thinking.
Oh, so it has to fall into like a full pattern in order to be considered a bias.
That's right.
Right. Got it.
You're running a race and you fall behind, but then you get a second wind. You speed ahead and you pass the person in second place. What place are you in now?
First place.
So let's say Tom is in first and Joe is in second, okay?
Right.
You're behind. You get this burst of energy and you pass the person in second place, which is Joe.
Oh. So then you're in second place.
So then you're in second place. So this is a fun, cutesy question. It's fun because people get it wrong. And people get it wrong because they just don't think very deeply about it. It's the kind of question that if you were to spend an hour thinking about it and there's $1 million on the line, most people would get this right. But just systematically, the kind of thought process that people apply to this question leads them to often get it wrong.
Right. You don't think about it too much.
Yeah. Some biases are the product of heuristics. A heuristic is just a simple strategy for quickly making judgments. We make lots of judgments throughout the day, and it's just not worth it to spend that much time or energy on every single judgment. You don't want to spend an hour deciding what to wear. So we rely on a rule of thumb that works well in most situations. So if I say, go to Amazon to buy a microphone, there's 100 ways to evaluate a microphone. I might just choose the mic that has the most positive reviews. That would be a heuristic way of making the decision. I'd figure if it has lots of positive reviews, it's probably good, and I'm not going to evaluate every single way that one can evaluate a microphone.
Right.
So let's talk about some heuristics. David is 26 years old. He studies computer science and likes anime. Is it more probable that David is A, a bartender and interested in video games, B, a bartender, or C, a bartender and a pipe smoker?
A bartender.
That's right. This is the same as the Linda problem. The Linda who could also be a feminist in addition to being a bank teller.
Oh, right. I remember.
So, of course, it's more likely that David is just a bartender because the probability of being a bartender and something else can't be higher than the probability of just being a bartender.
Right. I remember.
Now, people often get this sort of question wrong, and it is due to a heuristic that psychologists have given a name called the representativeness heuristic, where we evaluate the likelihood of something being a member of a particular category based on how well that thing represents the category. In this case, David seems to represent the kind of person who's into video games because he likes computer science and anime. So people will choose A, bartender who's also interested in video games, even though that violates basic probability theory.
It makes sense, though, in my head.
That you should choose A or B.
Video games. That he would also be interested in video games.
It does make sense that he'd be interested in video games, but is it more likely that he's a bartender and into video games or just a bartender?
No, just a bartender. But
it has to be bartender.
In my brain.
Yeah. Another heuristic, the availability heuristic. This is where we judge the probability of an event by how easily we could remember examples of the event. Couples were asked, what percent of the time do you take care of various things around the house? Like, what percent of the time do you do the dishes? What percent of the time do you take the garbage out? They asked them lots of questions like this. If you take the value given by each member of the couple, ideally they'd add up to 100%. So if I do the dishes half the time, my partner does the dishes half the time, and we rationally recognize this, we both write down 50%, you add it up, you get 100%. That makes sense.
If it doesn't add up to 100%, are you just like throwing your dishes away each night?
Well, even more likely is somebody is just mistaken. They're giving an incorrect probability.
All right.
And in fact, what actually happens is these numbers pretty much always add up to more than 100%.
Ooh, interesting.
People are overestimating.
So everybody thinks that they do the dishes more than they actually do.
Yes. And in this study, they also asked about negative things like how often do you start arguments? So it's not just I want to think of myself in a more positive light kind of bias.
Oh, yeah. It's a consistent overestimation.
Yes.
Interesting.
And it is plausibly due to this availability heuristic. When you're judging the probability of something by how easily examples of that come to your mind, if I'm thinking about how often do I do the dishes, it's very easy for me to remember myself doing the dishes because I'm always there when I do the dishes. I'm not always there when my partner does the dishes. So I overestimate how much I'm doing the dishes relative to my partner.
Because your partner may be doing the dishes a lot more than you realize.
That's right. Another heuristic. The anchoring and adjustment heuristic. This is a mental shortcut where we're trying to estimate something. So we begin with a number and then we adjust that number to take into account unique characteristics of the present situation. We have an anchor, that's our starting number, and then we adjust it. For example, say you are a runner. You're about to run a mile. And in the past, you usually run a mile in about 7 minutes. You're trying to predict how long it's going to take you to run a mile today. You might start with 7 minutes and then adjust it based on the unique characteristics of the situation. Might be like, well, I didn't sleep that well last night, so maybe I'll tack 30 seconds on.
30 seconds just because you didn't sleep well?
That's an example.
Okay.
Do you think that's an overestimate?
No, that's fair.
Okay. I mean, hey, I'm not a runner.
I haven't ran in a long time.
Okay. But you get the basic idea of you start with a number and then you adjust it.
Right.
Okay. All right, I'm going to give you a problem. And you have 5 seconds to answer it.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
This is going to be a challenge. Here we go. 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8. Okay, you have 5 seconds.
No.
All right, time is up. Just give us some number. Anything.
167.
Okay, 167. There was a study in which participants were given the question I just gave you. 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8. Another group of participants was given the exact same question, but the numbers were flipped. There was 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Now, obviously, these are the same value, right?
Yeah. Are they? Yes.
Yeah, we just move the numbers around.
Okay.
But in multiplication, it doesn't matter where the number's located.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing. We've just, instead of starting with the lowest number and going to the highest, we're starting with the highest and going to the lowest.
Is it a really big number? Because I feel like 167 is nowhere close.
Well, I'll give you the results of the study. For the first condition, where people did 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, etc., the median estimate was 512. For the second condition, which was 8 times 7 times 6, etc., the median estimate was 2,250. It's a big difference.
I would have done the same. Because 8 times 7 is where it gets you.
Exactly. Now, the correct answer is 40,320.
It is a really big
number. It is a really big number. But what's interesting here is the difference between our two conditions. It seems like what's going on is people will multiply the first couple numbers. They'll use that as an anchor, and then they'll adjust up. So if you're given the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 version, you do 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, and then you're like, oh, I'm out of time, so I'm just going to make it higher than whatever number I just came up with. If you are in the other condition, you're like 8 times 7 times 6. And now you have a bigger number, which is your anchor that you're starting with. You adjust it up. And so you end up with a bigger number.
Yeah, that makes sense. 8 times 7 really is, it gets you.
It's that classic 8 times 7 conundrum.
It's one of the reasons that 7 was afraid of 9.
Yes, exactly. The decoy effect. People will change their preferences between two options when a third option is added, even though this is not rational. Here's one informal example. A movie theater offered a small popcorn for $3 and a large popcorn for $7. In this case, most people pick the small popcorn. They then later decided to also offer a medium popcorn for $6.50. Adding this third option of medium should not increase the percentage of people who choose the small or the large popcorn. That doesn't make any sense. If anything, it could decrease it because some people who would have gone small or large are now going medium instead. But in actuality, what they found is if you add medium, now a greater percentage of people choose the large popcorn.
They changed their answer.
And it's weird.
That is weird.
What could be going on?
Influence.
Influence, certainly.
I'm not sure what could be going on.
Well, the small is $3, the large is $7, and the medium that was added was $6.50. So people see that while the large is only 50 cents more than the medium, and you're getting so much more popcorn. So wow, the large is such a good deal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, why get a medium when I could just have more popcorn? I do that. That sounds like girl math, but I do that.
I do not endorse that statement. But this is an interesting effect. And of course, businesses know about this and use it to their advantage. They'll add options in a way that it'll get people to choose something even more expensive than they otherwise would.
They know the business psychology.
They do. Now, this is kind of related to framing effects, the way that the interpretation of information can be biased by the way the information is presented. For example, if you're thinking about getting a surgery and the surgeon tells you the chance of survival 1 month after surgery is 90%. Or what if the surgeon said the chance of mortality 1 month after surgery is 10%? One of these sounds better than the other.
I feel like both of those, the 10% risk is just too high for me. I don't know if I'm getting the surgery.
Well, a 90% chance of surviving is, of course, the same as a 10% chance of dying.
I just like that.
But if you say there's a 90% chance of survival, it sounds better than a 10% chance of death.
You're framing it more positively.
Yes. And there are studies of doctors where they're asked to evaluate treatments of lung cancer. And if the outcomes are phrased in a positive way, like chances of survival, the doctors like the treatments better than if they're phrased in a negative way.
Yeah, I would too.
This is another fact that businesses are aware of. If you buy disinfectant, it might say something like it kills 99% of germs. It won't say only 1% of germs survive. It does mean the same thing.
Yeah. I'm just picturing like a Clorox bottle, them saying only 1% of germs survive. That feels like it's just like they're trying to make a super germ.
Yeah, it feels like, why are you leaving behind the 1% of germs?
Right? Where's the 100% of germs?
Or if you buy beef, it might say 75% lean instead of 25% fat. Same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Imagine you're buying a ticket to see a play, and the ticket costs you $50. You then buy a ticket to see an opera, and that ticket costs you $100. But after buying these tickets, you realize, oh no, both performances are happening on the same night, and the tickets are not refundable, so you can only go to one of them. Now, your best guess is you're going to enjoy the play more than the opera. Which do you go to? Do you go to the play or do you go to the opera?
I go to the play
Why?
because I'll get more enjoyment out of it.
That's very reasonable. Now, when posed this question, many people say that they would go to the opera
Because it costs more.
because it costs more.
The fallacy.
It's a sunk cost fallacy. People consider costs that have already been paid and can't be reclaimed. I mean, that $100 you spent on the opera, it's gone. It's not coming back.
Sell the tickets.
Well, the tickets are not refundable, and I guess let's assume you can't sell them.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, if you're going to waste your money either way, do the one that's going to make you happier at least.
Right, the money's gone. You can't get it back, so it doesn't even matter what you spent on the tickets. All that matters is what you're going to enjoy more.
Right. It's what you're going to get out of it. I feel like people disregard. We were talking about this earlier, human enjoyment. It's hard to like monetize it, so people don't think about it as much.
Mm-hmm.
Think about yourselves.
This sunk cost fallacy causes people to, for example, wear an ugly piece of clothing if it costs them more money.
I've done that. Guilty.
Or people are more likely to finish watching a boring movie if the movie ticket costs them money compared to if it's free.
I've also done that. The Revenant scarred me, I think. It was awful.
Which movie?
The Leonardo DiCaprio one.
Oh,
with
okay,
the
the bear. Yeah.
Yeah. I hated that movie.
All right, next, let's talk a little bit about human nature. The nature-nurture debate. Evolutionary psychology. Is who we are determined by genes or the environment? What do you think?
I like evolutionary psychology. I think about it pretty frequently.
Well, I also like it. Full disclosure. Before we dive in, there's some preliminary issues we have to deal with. Because what we're going to talk about is widely misunderstood and misinterpreted, so we got to lay out some basic principles before we even talk about the subject.
Such as
decoupling. So this is a concept that refers to the ability to separate empirical questions from moral or political questions. An empirical question is about what reality is like, describing the world. And then a moral question is what is ethical. When we're talking about politics, we're talking about how to organize society. And these are just different sorts of questions.
Do tell.
Here's an example. Are average temperatures on Earth increasing? That's an empirical question. It can be answered with a yes or no. I mean, they are or they aren't, right?
Yes.
It's a fact about the world. A related political question would be, should we tax carbon?
Yes.
So this has ethical implications. It's not merely a description of reality. We're bringing ethics into it. So it's distinct from the first question of, are temperatures increasing or not?
Oh, I understand.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'll just give one more example. Can a person be genetically predisposed to commit crime? Yes or no? I mean, it has an answer, right?
Does it?
It's a fact. Either genes can predispose you to behave in criminal ways or they can't.
Okay. Yes.
Right? They do or they
Yes
don't.
and no.
It's a fact about the world. Should we treat criminals differently based on their genes? That's a political question. Now we're bringing ethics into it. We're talking about what we want, what we care about, what we value.
It's no longer yes or no.
It's no longer purely a description of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And in our foray into evolutionary psychology, we're going to be focused on empirical questions. We've already talked about philosophy a lot. Okay, we did a bunch of episodes on philosophy. We're moving into science. We're going to talk about what reality is like We're not going to be so concerned with philosophical stuff, including ethics. We're going to focus on empirical questions.
Okay, if you say so.
Another important preliminary concept, the naturalistic fallacy, which is the idea that what is natural is necessarily good.
Define natural.
Let's say it's part of human nature. It's a genetic predisposition, for example. Men commit more homicides than women. Way more. It's not even close. Let's say I give an evolutionary explanation for this. I give some evolutionary theory according to which men are genetically predisposed to be more physically violent than women. Some might interpret me as saying that, well, that means male violence is justified. It's not actually bad because you're saying it's natural.
True, yeah, by that logic. I feel like, is it though? Because maybe the women are just not getting caught.
Let's accept that there is a real sex difference for a moment.
Yes.
That there is this difference between men and women. If one is to give an evolutionary explanation for it, that doesn't mean that male violence is actually good or justified.
Correct.
That is the naturalistic fallacy.
Okay.
We just talked about a sex difference, and implicit in that is we have this sex category that is made up of men and women. We're going to be talking about evolutionary psychology, which, by the way, I feel like we should define because we've been throwing it around. So evolutionary psychology is just applying evolution to psychology. It's taking evolutionary biology. We use that to understand animal behavior. You take those same sorts of theories, you apply them to humans to understand human behavior. So in our discussion of evolutionary psychology, we're going to be talking about men and women. So I want to do one little final bit more philosophy, talk about some philosophy of categories to nail down what these words could mean. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, sex is a word. It's a sound that comes out of your mouth. Humans invent words. Words are meant to be useful and convey information. If I am mugged and I immediately find a police officer, if I describe the criminal, I might say that the mugger is a man. This very quickly conveys information to the officer. If I instead said something like, well, the mugger was relatively tall and had a wide face and a squarish jaw and broad shoulders, this would be less compact and therefore less useful.
And a lot more complex.
It would be more complex. That's true. Let me ask you the deepest question I will ever ask you on this podcast. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
It depends. It's
What?
at best a sub.
Okay. So these categories we come up with, they're meant to be useful. We have categories like sandwich and fruit and vegetable. Apple fits in the fruit category. Carrot fits in the vegetable category. Now, when we're talking about logic, we can have these pure, beautiful, exceptionless categories. We could have a concept like integer, a number that's not a decimal or a fraction. 0, 1, 2, 3 are integers. 2.5 is not. We can classify all numbers as an integer or not an integer, and there won't be any exceptions. But in the real world, all of our categories have edge cases. For our hot dog question, I say there is no fundamental answer. There is no deep truth to the hot dog question. You can't just study hot dogs long enough, get a PhD in sandwiches, and eventually you will learn the deep truth of whether a hot dog is a sandwich. A hot dog is a sandwich just based on how you define it.
Yes, exactly. Sandwich is a relative term. Define a sandwich.
If somebody says it's meat in between bread, then I guess it is a sandwich. But you might use some different definition of sandwich.
No, because there's like cucumber and cheese sandwiches. Those are good. Or
That's
like
true.
there's different sandwiches that don't include meat.
There's the KFC Double Down, where instead of bread, it's fried chicken. Is that a sandwich?
No, that's just chicken. What do you mean? It's chicken in between two pieces of chicken?
There's something else. There's bacon and some sauce in there. I've never gotten it, but
That's
I
just a three
remember it.
piece.
It's like a sandwich. There's stuff in the middle, but the bread is fried chicken instead of bread.
I hate that.
Is a cucumber a fruit? Is an avocado a fruit? Is a jalapeno a fruit? They're a fruit depending on how you want to define fruit. In some ways, they're fruitish. In some ways, there's vegetable-ish. There's not a single deep answer to the question. These are just words we came up with. We invented these categories, fruit and vegetable. We use them because they're useful. And no matter what in the real world, these categories are going to have edge cases.
People get really passionate about tomatoes and if tomatoes are a fruit or not. Like, really passionate.
How does this passion manifest?
A lot of arguments. I've had
Okay.
professors actually for our like icebreakers who have asked us if a tomato is a fruit, and we have to answer with our little eye clickers. It was interesting.
What do most people say?
It was pretty split. It was 50-50.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was interesting. I think that was the purpose of the exercise.
If a tree falls in the forest and nobody is around to hear it, does it make a sound?
Define sound.
Well, if we think sound means acoustic vibrations in the air, then I suppose yes, it does make a sound. But if sound means an auditory experience in the brain, then I guess no, it doesn't make a sound. And that's the end of the discussion. There's no more philosophizing to be done. It's purely a matter of definition.
It's all relative.
Sex is a category. The point of these categories is to be useful. Different people use the word sex to refer to different things. For our purposes, we're going to use a biological definition whereby males produce small gametes, females produce large gametes, and a gamete is a sex cell like sperm or egg. This definition is going to include people who are on a developmental trajectory to produce large or small gametes like children. Even if a boy doesn't produce sperm, he is on a developmental trajectory to produce sperm, so he's still male. I look out into the world. I notice there are peacocks and peahens. Peacocks have this big, beautiful tail. Peahens are pretty drab. In elephant seals, you see there's two main types. One type weighs 10 times more than the other. In lions, some lions have this big bushy mane and some don't. And it turns out that there's a compact, straightforward way of describing the differences between these pairs of animals, and that is sex. The peacocks are the male. The elephant seals who are male weigh 10 times more, and it's the male lions that have the big bushy mane. So in sexually reproducing species, it's natural and useful to classify some members as male and others as female.
10 times is a lot more to weigh.
It's a lot more. The big boys.
They are. They sound like they are. That'd be scary.
Now, the one may argue that a feature of the sex category is that it exists on a spectrum. Whether one is male or female is on a spectrum. Whether or not this is true depends entirely on the definition of spectrum. Spectrum is a category just like all other categories. So spectrum means something like we have two categories and both of them are fuzzy, then a lot of things would be on a spectrum. Even tables and chairs would be on a spectrum because you could have a table that's kind of low to the ground and you could easily sit on it. And you're like, it's kind of chairish. So I guess tables and chairs are sort of on a spectrum. That'd be a non-standard way of using the term. I think most people wouldn't associate tables and chairs with a spectrum, but if you define it in that way, you could say that tables and chairs are on a spectrum.
I guess you could, in a way.
Another issue for the idea that sex is on a spectrum is we typically think of a spectrum as having two poles, and then there's some examples in the middle. If somebody says, well, I have particular features, these features are neither male nor female nor in between. I am some third thing. Then this third thing would not fit on that spectrum.
They have to have some traits of one or the other, or both.
If we conceptualize a spectrum as two categories that are fuzzy and there's some things kind of in between those two, then one could imagine saying that I am not at either of the poles, nor am I in the middle. So I'm not on this spectrum.
Right. So to be considered on the spectrum, you have to have traits of either or both.
The definition of spectrum wouldn't be sufficient if we want to include somebody who says they are not on the spectrum. They are not at either of the poles or in the middle.
Yeah.
So is sex a spectrum? It totally depends on how you want to define it. How about the idea that we define sex as what somebody identifies as? So if somebody identifies as male, that makes them male. That's a human-centric way of thinking about sex. We're going to be talking about evolutionary psychology. We're going to be applying ideas from evolutionary biology to humans. So when you're doing evolutionary psychology, you're treating humans as continuous with other animals. You're applying the same theories that you use to understand animal behavior to understand human behavior. So we're going to want a definition of sex that applies to all sexually reproducing species, not something that's specific to humans. So that's why we are going with a biological definition.
Right. That makes sense.
Another issue with defining sex purely based on how one identifies is that it's a circular definition, and circular definitions are just not as useful. So here's what I mean. Let's say I have a concept, I call it flibbity flu. And you ask me, what is flibbity flu? And I say, well, somebody is flibbity flu if they identify as flibbity flu. So here I'm using a purely circular definition. You might feel like you still don't know what flibbity flu refers to. In the same way, if we have this concept male, and you say someone is male if they identify as male, that begs the question of what the word male refers to in that sentence. Like, what is the content that makes up the concept male? If you identify with being male, what exactly are you identifying with? It feels like male has to refer to something.
Right. Like it's like we were saying earlier, like it needs a definition.
When people use this sort of definition, my guess is they have some unspoken idea of what they mean by male. And it might be dressing a certain way, behaving a certain way, you're treated a certain way by society. And in that case, that is part of the definition. That is the content that makes up the concept of male. It's not just purely circular.
Right. But there's also, I think there's roles that different sexes fill in society too. So in the same breath, these people fill those roles in a way, like father or uncle or even like different careers and stuff.
There's this social element to sex, a cultural element.
I believe so. It seems so, at least. And it's especially evident in the way that different sexes are treated and socialized and etc.
I think that's a good point. Some people would want to use another word for that concept. They would call that gender. Again, what counts as gender? You can define it how you want to define it. Whatever social or cultural aspects there are related to sex, they are somehow intertwined with this biological conception of sex.
And also the way that they're perceived. So as you're mentioning earlier, appearance.
Earlier, we discussed decoupling, separating empirical questions and moral questions. This definition of sex that we're using, a biological definition, is pointing to an empirical reality. There are animals that produce small gametes. There are animals that produce large gametes. And we're going to be talking about scientific findings related to that distinction. In doing so, we're not making any moral claim. This is not a political argument. We're not arguing for or against any policy. We're just pointing to some aspect of reality.
Correct.
Well, the only thing to do now is to delve in to the science of human nature.
To tell.
There's a lot of big questions therein, wouldn't you say?
Yes, of course, always.
So let us examine those questions on the next episode of The Scientific Worldview.